I'm so glad to have Adam here with me today. Adam, you probably know from a lot of the amazing content that he's been creating on LinkedIn, talking about a wide area of subjects, some things from AI to HR to poetry. But Adam, I want to throw it to you first. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey, how you got here, and what you're thinking about?
Sure. So thank you for having me, John. First of all, really,
Welcome,
really happy to
everybody.
be here. And yeah, I have kind of this varied background, which I think many people in HR do. A lot of people who end up in the human resources space didn't say, when they were in kindergarten class and were asked what they wanted to be when they grew up, they didn't say like, I want to be an HR technology or I want to be an HR business partner. I think I said I wanted to be a firefighter, which never even came close to coming true. But I went to college originally to study poetry. I had taken college level poetry courses in high school at a school called Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York. Um, After a couple of years of studying pretty much every domain of creative writing available at the institution, I ended up deciding this is kind of not what I want to do with my life. It's not kind of the career path that I want to pursue. And I looked for other avenues of storytelling where I could tell stories and still, make money and enjoy my life. And so that led me to pivot to film. So in the film and television space, I started to study producing. I started to study directing, screenwriting, all of the different elements of making television and film. And I did that through graduation. I did a variety of internships from pre-production, development, post-production, distribution. I even interned with a movie theater. I did kind of a little bit of everything. And when I graduated, I didn't want to leave New York. A lot of the opportunities at the time around 2014 were in Hollywood. They're out west. I wanted to see if I could find something here. I ended up in the unscripted television world, and it was just not a great fit. I didn't really enjoy what I was doing. I did the whole tap into my network, which at the time was fairly small. And I kept reaching back out to other alums. I was, trying to tap into my parents' network. I was talking to the career services department from my college, and I said, help. I need something that pays steadier. I need something that is not just driving me crazy every day. And through happenstance, one of the career service counselors had a childhood friend who was a recruiter at Viacom, whose name actually was Ralph Nader, not the same guy who ran for president. Um, but he happened to have a recruiting assistant position open, and he was asking, for referrals, and I was referred. I came in, I had a conversation with a recruiter, Michelle Cash, and they just needed a recruiting assistant. They needed someone who could do the basic administrative tasks, who could handle scheduling, who could help, filter candidates through in their ATS and all this other stuff. And so I went through that with this interview with Michelle, and she was like, your talent and casting background is works. You have the experience, you've worked with people, you've interviewed people before, and she brought me in. And I literally got a job offer the same day that the that I interviewed. And I ended up starting about 2 weeks later, and that was my journey into HR. That's how I kind of started. Was I started off as a recruiting assistant at Viacom.
I really love how you've really been able to sort of walk through a lot of different journeys in your path here. And with that, a lot of them have sort of gone around different ways of sort of creating content. So you've done a lot of work, obviously, which you were talking about, sort of the movie industry. You're pretty well known now on LinkedIn for creating content. Working at Paramount, obviously, they create a lot of content themselves, as does, Twitter sort of is a place for content. Although they're not creating the content themselves, they're using other people's content. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of your perspectives on that, of sort of generating your own stuff, be it the poetry or being the video, and how that's sort of translated a little bit into what you're doing today.
Sure. So I firmly believe that storytelling is a superpower that can be applied in a variety of domains. And I think it's incredibly important in the human resources domain. A lot of places treat human resources tasks as transactional. They treat HR as, kind of the compliance arm of the organization that keeps employees in line instead of kind of empowering them. And I view, if you're going to work in a human space, literally in a department that has the word human in it, you need to be able to tell stories. That's how we kind of connect with one another. That's how new ideas form. Um, and so kind of this journey from poetry and writing films. I wrote a couple feature films when I was in college, and even being on set and kind of like producing films and putting all this together, those orchestrations, those metaphors and analogies in those spaces translated really well to the HR space, and they translate well to the social media space, where you have this opportunity to tell stories, to share your experiences. It's no longer we're no longer siloed. Like I love seeing some of the jokes on LinkedIn around different experiences, both working internally, having great conversations with people like Mercedes Sullivan and Lydia Wu around, oh wow, we share these experiences with challenging HR technology implementations. Having that storytelling capability allows us to kind of translate our experiences on a day-to-day basis at work into shared nuggets where we can learn from each other, realize we're not alone in a lot of the challenges that we face, and that perhaps if we're all experiencing these same challenges at work, we all have the same opportunities to make things better, which is one of the things that I really appreciate about the HR science community and just kind of the broader communities on LinkedIn talking about HR and AI and technology and how we can kind of rethink the function.
Well, thanks. I'm glad. We're trying to do a lot here at HRSI, and I'm really glad you can be part of it. I hope you can be more part of it as we keep on sort of growing what we're doing. But as somebody who's sort of come into the HR space from the outside, and especially coming in a little bit before, but especially in the past few years, we've had this culture of layoffs, where it just sort of seems like right now HR is very happy to sort of say we're going to cut entire departments, whether it's necessary or not, and that's a little bit different than it used to be. So any ideas of, sort of like your perspective on sort of that layoff culture?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of toxic traits associated with HR, and they're hard to cut, right? This is how people perceive it. And if anything, I think HR has to do extra work to get over that hump. Um, I am not a big fan of the culture of layoffs, having come from Twitter, having come from a company that, due to an acquisition, downsized 80%. And I sat through that. I lived through the survivor's guilt of being one of the few retained employees. Layoffs are just, they're not good for culture. They're one of many short-sighted decisions that organizations tend to make for immediate returns. It may look good on the balance sheet for that quarter during that earnings call, but a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, there are ripple effects. There's plenty of research that shows the damage that this can do. There's a Harvard Business Review article that talks about how a layoff affecting 1% of the workforce can lead to up to a 31% increase in rate of voluntary turnover. So maybe you kept the most important people, but they're going to leave on their own because you got rid of their friends. And I think that's also an interesting gateway into the fact that HR has not really adopted this data first mindset. They've talked a lot about it, but you still see this culture of just reinforcing decisions by the business executives. HR is just kind of this arm that does what the brain of the business tells it to do. It hasn't really evolved in a lot of spaces to actually tell that brain, hey, the arm's not going to whack all these people, right? Here's some data that shows, maybe these layoffs are not the solution to our challenge. And maybe we can structure our organization better. Maybe we can hire more effectively so we don't have to constantly go through these iterations. I remember another study I saw that said something like in the last 5 years, the average Fortune 500 company has gone through 7 transformations. That's more than one transformation per year. It's ridiculous that these organizations are not strategically equipped um, to use their people effectively. And I think that's a huge area of opportunity for HR practitioners to kind of shift their mindsets and protect employees, ensure they're in environments where they can do their best work and they're not, in a position where they're constantly looking over their shoulder. There's another study that came out last year that said 1 in 5 Americans believe they will be laid off in the next 12 months. And that's just not a good culture.
Definitely, right? And this is something that I'm hopeful that HR can sort of recognize and sort of make sure that we're not part of this sort of negativity, let alone driving it. But even if an executive is pushing for it, that we have the right tools to push back on them, both from the data side that you're talking about, but also from the moral side, right? To sort of say, like, that's not what we want to be part of, in addition to, of course, the culture side. But can you talk to us a little bit about sort of your experience at Twitter? So that's where you and I met when you were working at Twitter. And I know, like, while you were Twitter now X, of course, while you were there, I know you were doing some consolidation of some databases to try to create more efficiencies. What was the feel like when you were there? What was the work that you were doing?
Yeah, Twitter was a very unique experience in a lot of ways, in a lot of positive ways as well. I met some people that I'm still in touch with, some people that I actually still work with on the consulting side, who've added tremendous value to my life. I experienced new ways of performing HR that I had never kind of seen before. I'd read in books and I'd wanted to practice in my previous employer, but there just wasn't the right problem to solve or the right opportunity to kind of leap at. So when I first came into Twitter, that entire journey was a story in and of itself, John, where I came in and my manager quit 2 weeks before I started. So the person who had taken me through the interview process, who had convinced me to come, who kind of hand selected me with the approval of their peers, she was gone. And amusingly enough, I still have a positive relationship with her. But I came into this new environment with one of the few familiarities I was expecting not even there. So I ended up reporting directly into the senior director, Janine Ling, who is an incredible person. She really accommodated me. She did her best to say, spend these first couple weeks just learning. And so I spent weeks learning the systems. I was brought in as a people systems analyst at first to really focus on how Twitter was using its recruiting technology and how they could be more effective. They had goals of doubling the company in size when they hired me, and they needed to equip their processes and their products to support that. Um, so I spent time learning. They had Gartner and I believe Deloitte both come in and do studies. There was lots of different research papers from these outside vendors that hadn't actually been applied. There had been a tremendous evolution in the number of people. And so I went from this space of we were prioritizing, we were constantly building lists of, what can we keep, what can we kill, what can we scale, how do we want to prioritize these things? And my first 6 months or so was dedicated to kind of prioritizing these things. We did some things that were required out of compliance. We built a pay transparency solution. We took incremental steps towards building integrated workforce planning applications where we were making sure that our different systems upstream were talking to our human capital management system, and then that was talking effectively downstream to our applicant tracking system, that our recruiters and our hiring managers were making strategic and informed decisions around where they were opening up headcount and where they were looking for talent. We did a lot of really great work, which led ultimately to the biggest project I worked on towards the tail end around interview scheduling, where for the first time in my experience in working in HR or even having conversations with other people in HR, we had a dedicated UX researcher and a dedicated UX designer who came in and helped us work with the end users, talk to the coordinators, talk to the recruiters, talk to the hiring managers, even kind of gain a candidate perspective, although we didn't actually go out and do focus groups or anything like that, but kind of gain those perspectives and inform the design of a proprietary interview scheduling solution using kind of an existing SaaS platform, but designing it to personalize it for Twitter's experience. And it took months and it took a lot of collaboration across IT and different HR partners. But we built something that was really, really magical, in my opinion. Everyone was extremely satisfied with it. Everyone was really looking forward to it. There was a lot of compromise along the way. We had to deprecate one feature to support another one. But it looked like it was going to be a really strong product. And then the whole Elon Musk situation went down. There were budget freezes. We had to kind of abandon ship. And we never got to ship that to production. But that experience still stays with me. I've made a couple of posts about it where I think we need more people with UX backgrounds in these spaces. But this was also a huge lesson in adaptability for me, where the next thing I knew, 90% of my team was gone. Every single person on the people systems and analytics team who is specifically around systems was gone except for me. We had like a project manager. We had a couple other people around. I think we had like one person who was like from Workday still there. Um, but the team was bare bones. We had gone from like 80 people to 8, I think. Um, And we had to adapt and we had to learn. And for me, that was actually weirdly an environment I thrived in. I had to learn all these Workday modules I'd never worked with before. I had to help support payroll after the entire payroll team resigned. I had to understand integrations across different systems as entire administrative teams were gone. And we had to figure out how we could accelerate that keep, kill, scale kind of mindset, or keep, scale, kill mindset from earlier, where we had to rapidly figure out what technologies are absolutely needed for compliance and efficiency and what can we scrap, because we were a totally different company after we downsized from like 8K employees to less than 2,000. And put a lot of effort in there, was also dealing with investigations from three-letter agencies where we had to provide information kind of in an effective way, and it was a lot of hats. It was a very quick lesson.
Well, I'm sorry to sort of hear about, your manager leaving. That's happened to me, unfortunately, and this is, I think, a little bit of the layoffs that we were talking about earlier that creates this sort of negative feel to it. But to sort of give everyone context, Workday's recruiting system at the time that you're talking about was abysmal. That module just really didn't work. I was doing some Workday HRS analyst work then, and that specific module was so problematic. It would take candidates forever to try to apply to a job. We had really high rates where people just wouldn't complete the process at all. So I think it's really interesting how you pulled a UX person in to sort of like figure that out and really work it through. You talked about the system becoming magical. So ignoring some of the negative things that sort of happened around it, what was the real magicalness of that system? Like what really made that amazing?
Sure. So we built the solution in Salesforce. So we were leveraging Smart Recruiters as our applicant tracking system. Workday was just kind of like the HRIS in terms of the tech stack here. And Smart Recruiters was fairly limited. It had a user-friendly experience that was certainly more modern than the Workday interface that many people know and love or love to hate. Um, but we decided we wanted to figure out where are people operating, where were people currently behaving, which is another thing that I think a lot of practitioners don't think about in the HR technology space. They don't think about where are our users currently. They just say, let's buy Yellow, let's buy this system, let's buy Gem, let's throw this at people. Where are your people currently? What are they comfortable with? What are they comfortable clicking? What are they comfortable doing? Yes, people naturally need to learn new things. They naturally need to upskill. But this is where that UX team really came in and helped us. They helped us understand recruiting coordinators at the time, because of legacy systems and processes, were doing some of the work for tracking information around interviews already in Salesforce. And they had this very disjointed process across Salesforce, Google Sheets, and Smart Recruiters. And we determined the level of complexity that we had with some of our interview processes and our interview loops with different teams. Smart Recruiters just couldn't at the time accommodate it in full. But the way we used Salesforce and the quality of the developers we had in-house allowed us to build something that the users, the coordinators who were already there, could handle. The way Salesforce worked, it was going to permit the system to push information out to people effectively. We developed this thing where the people who were going to be using the system to input interview information, to automate some of these processes with downstream integrated information from Workday and Smart Recruiters, they were going to have a really pleasant experience. They were going to be able to kind of say, I want this type of interviewer. And they would, depending on the job and the context of it, it would assign that specific interviewer, the person with the qualifications to interview for that information. From there, we would enable them to kind of quickly go to a calendar and still figure out that personal touch of, even with AI assistants that we see currently, human calendars are so messy. Some of us block off lunch. Some of us forget to block off time that we need. Some of us will put 7 meetings over each other because we just want visibility into them, particularly if we're leaders. The human touch and having these coordinators be able to kind of quickly navigate to the calendars, pick times, input them into the system, and then have that develop these kind of nice niche templates that handled all of the communication elements. It was a lot of work to build kind of the apps, the Lightning apps that were supporting this in Salesforce, to build the integrations that were supporting this. And the fact that we made that happen, because so many HR technology teams, they struggle to just implement one system. The fact that we were kind of integrating across different systems, right? We were integrating with Google Calendar. We were integrating with Smart Recruiters, leveraging downstream data that had been transformed from a Workday to Smart Recruiters integration. It took a lot of effort, and it took a lot of people who thought differently to make it actually happen.
And honestly, like I'm jealous that I wasn't able to see this. It sounds like such a cool product that you're talking about. And like I've been on the other side of just trying to pull a few things together or getting one data flow that'll bring the data to where people need it and let them, make some choices in that. Like you're describing, it's just honestly really amazing. I know that before this you were working at Paramount. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that sort of pulled you into this HR tech space that led you able to do some cool magic work in?
Sure. Yeah. So walking it back, right? When I first started at Viacom, I was a recruiting coordinator. I was super annoying is the easiest way to describe it when I first started. I asked a lot of questions. One, I hadn't done recruiting before. So I was trying to understand, okay, I had been involved in talent and casting. I knew we wanted the quirkiest people in front of the camera, but quirkiness maybe wasn't the attribute that was best for hiring people at Viacom. So I was kind of constantly asking questions about the decision-making processes, about why we did things in a certain way for coordinating interviews, about the time we spent on different tasks. I was just curious. I didn't know there were methodologies that could support a lot of the things that I was thinking about. I just wanted to be more effective, and I wanted to understand the work that I was doing inherently. So 6 months into my time, I had started to just tinker in the system. I always liked databases. I never thought about using them as part of my career. I never formally studied data engineering or anything in that context, but I liked playing with databases. And I started to build reports for myself. I started to track my own performance. I started to build templates to repeat interview scheduling communications. Most of the team was copy pasting information from iCIMS into Outlook and hitting send. I just started to send the communications from iCIMS when I figured out that I could just use variables and I could, automate where information was coming from, and I could just repeat and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat and not have to copy paste or write things from scratch every single time. And that got me noticed. So there was a nascent operations team. I think around 2014, 2015 is when a lot of companies had just started to build out like recruiting operations. Like they had these HR operations like centers. Sometimes they were decentralized, sometimes they were centers of excellence, but these ideas were just starting. And this two-person department was like, who's this kid who's doing our job for us? Like who's starting to centralize things and do all these other things. And Ka-Ming Lee, who ended up being my manager there, she brought me into her office and was like, wanted to talk to me. And at the time, the way things were structured, all of the coordinators actually reported into the operations team in terms of like our paychecks getting signed. In terms of the day-to-day operations, we reported into specific recruiters. So when I got brought into Ka-Ming's office, I thought she was going to fire me for being too nosy and asking too many questions and doing things differently. Instead, she basically offered me the opportunity to do multiple roles at the same time. She was like, I want you to keep doing recruiting coordination. I want you to keep learning recruiting. 6 months is not enough time to really understand recruiting. But I also want you to, do about a split of maybe 70-30, 70% recruiting, 30% operations work. And the rest is kind of history. Like fast forward 6 years, I got involved in people analytics projects. I got involved in systems implementations. I got involved in vendor assessments. I got involved in a lot of integrations work. I ended up learning APIs faster than anyone else kind of in the team. Most of them didn't know what that meant at the time. It was kind of really like a running joke where there were all these acronyms I'd throw out at people and they'd be like, what's HTML? What's an API? What's JSON? Is that like a singer, Jason Derulo? And there were a lot of things that people didn't really get that I was kind of trying to stay at the forefront. And that kind of culminated in when Viacom and CBS merged, that culminated in a project to implement a new system that could support recruiting and HR at scale for a company that had gone from about 12,000 employees to nearly 28K. And so that was my first exposure to a massive system implementation. After all the lessons I learned across all these different avenues of solving kind of these different small problems. One of my bigger projects previously was basically a digital transformation for the internship program at Viacom, where I worked very closely with Suzanne Rosenthal and Andrea McRae and a few other people on the team who I'm still in touch with and adore dearly. We got them to get off of paper, right, and get into the system and start to structure their internships in ways where they could track their data. They were really struggling to track conversions to see the efficiency of how many interns were becoming staff. What were the retention rates of those people? What was the efficiency and effectiveness of that? And we were able to equip them with data where they were able to restructure the internship program. And they were able to get rid of some of the internships that were more just people trying to get cheap labor, right, to do menial tasks, and really prioritize the internships that were training people, upskilling them, selling them on the brand, and setting them up for career paths within the organization that add value. So projects like that set me up for this big project where I was responsible for implementing SAP SuccessFactors at Viacom CBS for the recruiting central module and the recruitment marketing module. Um, and yeah, that was kind of my journey there.
See, that's what I really love about your story, because a lot of the way that you're going through this is the way that a lot of HR teams are evolving, right? Doing HR, in your case, recruiting, then eventually you sort of cleaning up some of the administration, setting up some APIs, some integrations, sort of getting that together, and then taking on sort of something really big, like implementing a new system. And then from there, a lot of the stuff that you were doing that you talked about earlier at Twitter, of really like moving the data to the right spot to really make that big impact, to really make that change. Now, sort of continuing on with that, looking at the next steps of where you want to be and where you want the HR teams to grow into, you're doing a lot of work with AI right now. I know in one of your roles, prompt engineer is part of your title. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that? Because most HR people just aren't really there yet.
Sure. So I have been tasked internally with kind of co-leading several functions within Recruiting Advisors, along with John McCall and Matt Beaster, around labs and partnerships. And we do a lot of experimentation. I've done some internal trainings on prompt engineering. I've done some internal trainings on how to automate different processes with OpenAI. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I've always wanted to be at the forefront. One of the projects I kind of skipped over at Viacom was we had this conversion process on an annual basis, and I promise you this dovetails into this. But we had this conversion process where we would have to take 5, 6, up to 10 coordinators off of their desks, just to support these large conversion waves where we would convert hundreds up to 1,000 contractors to full-time staff roles, and we had to process all of their offer letters. We had to do all of this paperwork, and it was tedious. It led to backlogs, led to delays in hiring because we had to take these coordinators off of their desks. And so I spent a lot of time figuring out how could we automate this. I spent a lot of time researching different technologies, and that was kind of the gateway drug for me to APIs and figuring out how we could move information around. And then I started to study Microsoft Power Automate. I started to learn about Zapier, and all these other tools that would allow me to help systems talk to each other and take repetitive tasks and do them on people's behalves. And it took 2 years, but I was able to pitch a solution that started in Zapier and moved over to Microsoft Power Automate on a service account that removed the need to take 10 coordinators off their desk and instead had 1 to 2 coordinators supervising the process, while the process was largely automated from end to end. And seeing that, having that success is kind of what led me to continue to kind of question things in this space. And the seeds had always been planted. When I was in middle school, I was super interested in K. Eric Drexler, and his books around nanotechnology and these concepts of radical abundance. When I was in college, I took a course called Is the Singularity Near with Jim Marshall, who had a background in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I was just curious about this concept of these algorithms or these machines that could process so much more information than the human brain could, that could retain this information and could use it. And I think that keen interest paired with my background in poetry and storytelling really equipped me well for this new concept of prompt engineering, right? Using words to kind of get a system to give a response that we want. And I've played with it in a number of ways, right? I've done things that are more for fun. I've built a few image generators, but I've also done things with the Labs partnership where I am, building out solutions that allow us to query databases with natural language. So a real big challenge in the data space, particularly in the HR data space, is you got these analysts and these data scientists who build these beautiful visualizations, but then you have these end users who don't understand them. And what I'm playing with is this concept of allowing end users to use natural language, like just typing, hey, what's the health of my current rec count? And having them be able to type that and then having that information be able to, get a response to them that's both visual and linguistic and, allow them to talk in their words and their understanding from their perspective and meet them where they're at. So that's one way that I'm playing with it right now. On top of that, we're working with both internally and with third-party partners to understand ways that we can use it for summaries, right? How can we generate kind of unbiased candidate summaries that can be used either to assist with resume review, since the average recruiter spends 7 seconds looking at a resume. How can we kind of help unbias this and strengthen that? And at the same time, how can we potentially give recruiters or sourcers an edge in sharing this information by having AI do the original write-up of something of a candidate? They then just become copy editors who tinker with it, who say, AI didn't really get this right from the conversation, or AI didn't really get this right from my notes. But they have this starting point, because one of the biggest challenges that I've seen in the recruiting and sourcing space is when you have to write something from scratch. You just had all these conversations, you had all this information all over the place about a candidate, and you want to deliver the consolidated story about that candidate to a hiring manager. It's a challenge. And sometimes we don't present information effectively because of that. So being able to use AI to consolidate this information, to take it, different components of these different conversations we had with different candidates and help us retell our story, so we can frame these people in the best possible light, is something that I view as really, really powerful.
Definitely, definitely. And I sort of feel like this is one of the first times in sort of the way new technology comes out, excuse me, where instead of it only being sort of relegated to the people that are very techy, right? Which is, you are pretty techy, but we're really creating something that's sort of bringing it to a lot of other people, and making it just sort of easier for them to interface with it. So people that may not really be interested in being as techy as you and me still get the experience with this, and it still really helps where they're going. Since this is new and a little bit different, we don't really have the sort of the writing to it. But for a long time, if you wanted to be sort of doing this sort of technology work, people really pushed you into a engineering program or a computer science program. Can you talk a little bit about your time at Sarah Lawrence and sort of how some of those have really influenced it? I know you mentioned that earlier, and it seems to keep on coming up. So like for someone who wants to go into something like HR technology or AI, do you think a liberal arts background is going to be helpful to them?
I think a liberal arts background is helpful for almost any gig, and I think it's going to add a lot of value in kind of an AI supported economy, because what liberal arts really fundamentally prioritizes is interdisciplinary study. And we see it with Josh Berson's systemic HR. We see it with a lot of the conversations on LinkedIn around, are we solving problems the right way? Are we solving the right problems, right? Instead of being so solution oriented, a lot of liberal arts thinking asks you to go out and find problems in the world, which is very similar to startup mentality, right? Startup companies need to find their niche. They need to find a problem that hasn't been solved before they try to find a solution to solve it. And I think that mindset is extremely helpful. Even if you aren't super data savvy, even if you don't have a mathematical background, you haven't studied computer programming. I studied a lot of these things lightly, but I by no means have a master's degree in computer programming, right? Or in data science. I understand the concepts. And that's another thing that my liberal arts education really helped me develop, was the ability to talk to people smarter than I am, who have deep expertise in these domains, understand them, not be able to replicate their work at all, because I can't, but be able to understand them, have a conversation with them, understand how can we use people with these capabilities, how can we connect these people with other people. And I think that's a big aspect of HR, and it's a big aspect of HR tech. So I think people who have backgrounds studying different disciplines, right, can really bring that mindset to the table. My old boss, Matt Beaster, who I work with at Recruiting Adventures, he studied philosophy at a small liberal arts school in Ohio. Um, like he too has a similar background where philosophy is translated really well to solving really big, amorphous problems in the human resources and organizational space. So I think that there's a lot of runway and a lot of opportunity with liberal arts degrees and with any sort of program that enables you to do that. And I think the way that learning is so democratized now, I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve this. But the way learning is so democratized also really catalyzes these opportunities for people to learn new things, right? If you know how to think, you can come into a new domain and approach it, strategically, and evaluate it, and you can come in and you can learn how to code lightly. You can learn how to product manage, you can learn how to project manage. These are all learnable skills. And I think having a background in a space that focuses you interdisciplinarily equips you to ask the right questions, which also helps with prompt engineering. If you know how to ask good questions, if you know how to kind of keep poking and kind of keep iterating until you get the right answer, that's a really, really critical skill with AI in its current state.
I think one of the things that I always sort of push on my analysts is that if somebody comes to us with a question and we answer that question, we didn't do our job, right? Part of our job is going to them and helping them craft a better question. Because a lot of people, who are coming into, the people analytics function have something that they need, but they don't always know exactly how to express that. And sometimes they don't even really know what they need, right? So sort of, trying to take that. Um, how do you sort of think about sort of this AI technology and sort of where it's going, especially in context to last year, which was when Bitcoin really crashed. So we had a lot of hype up about sort of what this new technology with Bitcoin and how everything's going to be on the chain, and some of that is really true and really great, and honestly, the math behind it's really cool. But some of it really didn't work, and there was a lot of false hype to it, a lot of things that were not really truthful to it. Now we have this AI hype with large language models. What's going to be the next step with this, and how is culture going to sort of react to it?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different angles I want to come at this from. One is like to your point around users don't always know what they want. That's a big challenge, right? There's a famous Henry Ford quote that, depending on where you look at things, maybe ChatGPT made this up, but there's a famous Henry Ford quote where he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. They would not have asked for a car, right? Um, and I think that's a challenge in a lot of these spaces, right? People don't ask for new technology. They don't ask for, you know, uh, bagless vacuums or cordless vacuums, right? Like they don't ask for latex. Like they don't ask for these innovations. They don't ask for handheld gaming devices. We didn't ask for TVs, right? Someone came up with this concept that really enabled us and transformed the world. And when it comes to AI, like I think that cryptocurrency, right, to kind of broaden it beyond just Bitcoin and blockchain concepts and Web3 fundamentals, these have been experiments, right? They're experiments. So was the gold standard to some degree, right? Like while yes, there were some men in a back room who made an agreement, like the whole idea of paper money and everything that we have today was kind of an experiment that just took flight, right? With the right systems of authority and power, we ended up in these spaces. In fact, paper money, as much as the gold standard is still a thing and we still exchange paper money, has largely been replaced with credit cards. Right? Credit and debit and these new kind of ways of exchanging money, those also just kind of entered our consciousness from kind of nowhere. And if you know the story of the first credit card, it's another really interesting space where again, no one was asking for credit cards. Um, so I think there's going to be this tipping point, and according to Jensen Huang with NVIDIA's ER, he says we've reached it. I don't necessarily agree with that. Um, there's going to be this tipping point where AI is just so kind of omnipresent and in our face and ideally empowering us that we're just going to want to use it. We're going to want to use tools. I think the thing that's fundamentally different about AI and even different, from cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, is that it's embedded in things, right? Like AI is not like a cell phone, right? While we use a cell phone as part of a broader system to communicate, the cell phone is a physical device that we have in our hand. Right? The fact that software that we use on a day-to-day basis, potentially hardware, potentially literally the things that we interface with on a day-to-day basis and touch are going to have AI in them, that's a really exciting and freaky slash scary concept, right? And I think we need to have a lot of conversations around it, right? Like I joined a group called the Responsible AI Institute, and I'm trying to get involved in spaces that are having more conversations around it because there are more than 60%, 70% of Americans are anxious and afraid of AI. They think they don't trust AI. I think 66% of employees polled in a Deloitte survey did not trust AI. Right? They don't trust the outputs. They don't know if it's true or not. And those are going to be really big things we have to get past. I think ideally we operate in the open, which is what some places or some companies are trying to do. Meta is really prioritizing open source and operating in the open. And we need to kind of show people how these things are being built, remind people they're not finished products, and also really demonstrate use cases that help people. There's a lot of cool use cases that are like, oh yeah, watch me automate hiring. Is that really helping the average person? Not in the way we've articulated, at least. It's more, watch me create an algorithm that reinforces biases in hiring and just does it faster. What we want to do or see more of is look at how AI can help us connect these two systems and make an experience that's really annoying for you easier. I mean, again, while you could zoom out even further, let's just imagine AI could make paying taxes easier because it helps you consolidate all of this information, right, that you normally need to chase around and aggregate to file on an annual basis. That would be really, really helpful. That would be something I'm sure people would love assistance with, particularly if there was transparency in it and they knew that it was optimized to help them get their information together and not optimized to force them to give the government even more money, right? Which is where that transparency comes into play. And I think there's similar parallels in HR. Same challenge with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency was people not really understanding it. And the easiest way for people to understand things is for you to demonstrate its benefits. People, it took them 40, 50 years to get comfortable flying in planes. You know, we went from 160,000 people flying a day in 1960 to over 2 million, nearly 3 million people a day flying today. It took time. It took people seeing, oh, wow, look at these people traveling across the country in ways I'd never seen before. And the planes are landing successfully and everyone's healthy and happy. Then people started to get on planes. I think we're going to see a similar on-ramp with artificial intelligence powered technologies.
No, definitely. And along the way, there's a lot of fits and starts, right? There's a lot of times that sort of like rev things up, a lot of things that don't really work. But sort of looking at this and sort of projecting as much as you can, sort of based on your experience, what is the human-computer interaction going to be? How are people going to be talking to these LLMs? What do you think is really the right way? And what are the things we should be thinking about in this conversation?
Sure. I mean, I think we always want to put the human first, right? Like we never want to put the machine first. We never want to put profits first. We never want to put the corporation first. Maybe some people will disagree with me, but we always want to put the human element first. One of the, big goals with human-centric design and with human-computer interaction is this concept of zero UI. And it's intended to be one of those moonshot I can't fathom this. This sounds ridiculous. Adam, what the heck are you even talking about? Concepts. That's the point, right? The first person to introduce the cell phone concept literally put a wooden block in their pocket and walked around to show that people would feel comfortable having something of that shape and size in their pocket. Um, the notion of zero UI is this idea that we no longer come into like an application and we have to navigate a screen and we go from place to place. It's very much natural, and it's not just natural language like we talk about, it's just natural. This is where this gesture technology, that's coming out with like the Apple Vision Pro, it seems silly to a lot of people right now, but being able to kind of just gesture at something, being able to express a need for something and having that need be anticipated and kind of like supported could be really, really empowering. And again, I'm saying this in a really abstract way because there's still a lot of technical barriers that need to be overcome to really achieve this. But that's kind of, I think, that's the moonshot goal, is a zero UI experience where when I need something, my need is kind of anticipated, I'm supported in addressing it, and I'm able to focus on higher level thinking. I'm able to actually address problem solving and think about how can I solve problems within my organization, problems within my community, problems within society. So I'm not bogged down all day trying to document the work I did today for the organization and uploading that to a library or a wiki that no one's ever going to read. I'm spending more time actually thinking about how am I going to solve these problems. Then as I build my solutions, AI is supporting me in developing this documentation. AI is taking the lift out of me explaining what I'm doing and allowing me to just do it. And to me, that's kind of the ideal, right? Is when AI can enable us collaboratively as teammates, as fellow human beings to work together towards common goals without having to constantly get bogged down in administrative work to explain ourselves. I think that's where I really see the fundamental, that transformative value of AI.
And that's sort of how we can sort of, in some sense, define successful technologies, right? A lot of things come and they're cool and they're interesting and it's a fad and then everyone forgets about it. But the stuff that really sticks around are things that do sort of become that commonplace thing that really do help humans, right? You mentioned cars before and planes. Like, if I need to get someplace, I don't really think about like, well, how does this plane work? And isn't this cool? You just sort of get on the plane and buy the ticket, right? Or the computers that I work with, Microsoft Excel has had a huge change in the world, but we just sort of think of it as like, oh, it's just Excel, right? We have one of the questions from the audience from Daniel. Can you touch on the evolving role of HR DevOps? Where are we on the curve today?
Sure. I think the concept of HR DevOps is in and of itself an interesting one, right? Because different organizations are structured in different ways. Uh, I think the arguments often come in from the wrong angle. Like I am someone who's very much focused on what's the most effective way to solve a problem. I don't care what your department is called. I don't care who is the quote unquote authority on something. What is the most effective way to solve a problem? And ideally, HR departments are able to kind of structure in this way where whether you have a dedicated HR DevOps team, whether you have someone who's just serving in an HR DevOps role, um, you're able to have these conversations, and powered by data, you're able to prioritize what you're working on, right? What are we actually solutioning? It's something we were working on a framework with at Twitter. It's something that did not exist at Viacom, and that's not anyone's fault. Like, that's just the nature of the system, the nature of the beast. This was a new concept. We were building systems as we needed them, right? Oh crap, we need to track that people are coming into work. Let's build a system for tracking attendance. Oh crap, we need to pay people, and we need to be able to do it digitally now. Let's have a payroll system and a compensation process that enables this. We've always kind of acted in this reactive way. An ideal state, we're able to use data to inform these DevOps pipelines where we're able to, you know, create new experiences that address challenges proactively. And again, what that role looks like, I think it's going to constantly evolve. And I'm honestly, again, of the opinion that these centers of excellence or these different structures, like, I'm a fan of Josh Bersin, but even this whole push towards employee experience and rephrasing it as employee activation, we often get really hung up on semantics instead of, trying to tactically address what's the best way to solve this problem? What's the best way for us to collectively kind of monitor the health of our organization, monitor the health of our people, and figure out this is what needs to be improved.
So we just in general, we sort of create so much data in HR. And unfortunately, a lot of places don't have people analytics teams yet, so they're not really sure how to manage some of that data. Can you talk to me a little bit about sort of how you do leverage recruiting data? What are the types of things that you found are really helpful in sort of explaining, what's going on behind the scenes to maybe a non-technical person?
Sure. I think the things that are the most valuable are the ones that are kind of the simplest to explain to another person. Uh, as silly as it sounds, one of the top things is just around sourcing data and being able to effectively actually communicate the journey, and not just like say, oh, you had 718 people come through LinkedIn last week. What's that mean to that person? But being able to actually tell stories with source data and being able to see where people are coming from and what those journeys look like, being able to actually effectively articulate that, 81% of your hires were employee referrals who came through X avenue over the last 3 months. That's something that's interesting. That's something someone can double click on, right? And I think that's another big thing that, people analytics can do better, and people can kind of handle HR data around this idea of being able to double click into things, right? Being able to present information in a way where this might be something, right? We see a correlation here. We see something here. Should we dive deeper into that? And I think source data is one because it's very easy to understand as an applicant or even as a practitioner. Oh, I get it. To apply to a job, someone had to come from somewhere. We're putting all this money into advertising. We're putting all this money into candidate engagement. Understanding where people come from and what that journey looks like is very helpful. Understanding things beyond that too, like click-through rates, understanding drop-off, right? We discovered at Viacom at one point that our drop-off rate on mobile applications was 90%. And that was when we realized that our career site was not mobile optimized, right? Like, these are simple things you can look at. Like, if you're at a small company and you haven't looked at your Google Analytics, if you have that set up, or if you don't, go set it up. See what the experiences are for people applying to your jobs. Like, where are they dropping off? Extend that further to time, right? Time metrics are also very, very helpful, but they need to be framed in a way where people aren't making assumptions. Because the thing that I see around time to hire and time to fill, time between stages that I often see getting blown up is, it took us 50 days to hire. That's obscene. Where's the benchmark, right? You need these benchmarks. You need to look either at external data or measure performance over time and really understand what's the objective. Why are we trying to hit 40 days in our time to fill? Is there an actual scientific data-driven reason behind that? Or is it just an executive was like, that feels like a good number? So those are some of the things I think that, you should be tracking, right? You should be tracking how long does it take to fill a role? But you should be tracking that over time to see, okay, how does that downstream impact time to impact, right? Or time to effectiveness, where people are coming in and actually learning and contributing to the company. How much did that really cost the company, those 40 days? Oftentimes it's worth it. There's research that shows it's worth it to take an extra 10 days to hire, to make sure you hire the right person, right? So there's all these kind of like qualifiers and important elements where step one is just making sure you're measuring. And I think time is one of the easiest things to measure. accuracy can be a challenge. That's where things like proxies can come into play, and that's where AI and these more advanced software as a service platforms are helping. Um, but being able to track time in recruiting, I think, is extremely valuable. And then you have other percentages like drop-off rates between steps, offer acceptance rates, things like that, that again are really helpful in telling a story and allow you to double click to better understand why are people not accepting our offers? Why is everyone dropping off after the interview stage?
There's a lot of management involved in that, right? And there's a huge amount of sort of corporate baggage that a lot of times we face at these companies. It's very easy to just do today what we did yesterday, right? And HR talks about these sort of best practices, which is just sort of common practices or, what was happening in the past. And you're a real change maker, right? You're coming in, all the stories you told us, sort of seeing this environment, sort of shifting stuff up. Do you feel that's easier as a consultant, or do you feel that's easier when you're inside the organization?
I really think it varies. It's easier to say it's easier as a consultant. And what I mean by that is that on the consulting side of things, it's easy to come in, communicate a new way of doing things, see a client start to do it, and then your contract ends and you leave and the client abandons it. So it's easy to feel like on the consulting side, you're able to be more of a change maker. I do think there are aspects of it, right? When you're consulting, you can reach more clients potentially, right? You're not stuck within one organization. I do think at the same time, in-house, there are opportunities, particularly in the right environment, to go outside, right? Like I know that when I was at Viacom, they were not afraid of letting me speak at ISIMS events. They were not afraid of letting me go to these different networking events and share how we were doing things and demonstrate best practices to other similar enterprise organizations. Some companies are afraid of that. They don't want their top talent to go around telling other people how they're doing things because they're afraid that talent's going to get attracted elsewhere, or they're afraid that somehow this secret is going to allow other companies to out recruit them, which is kind of silly. Um, and so I think the answer is it really depends on the environment, right? Consulting allows you to hit more people, but it doesn't always guarantee that you're going to be there long enough to see the change through. In-house, you often have a bigger challenge, more friction to really push things through, and you're one of many voices within the system. But over time, you can really chip away at that. I think there's some really great examples in Adam Grant's book Originals, where he talks about, some stories like someone in the CIA who it took her like 20 years to get the CIA to actually develop an in-house information sharing system that was digital. But she spent a lot of time building relationships, demonstrating the power of her knowledge and how she was successful, and eventually got there. And I think that an interesting parallel is I think AI may help unlock that for certain voices too. They'll be more equipped with the information they need to persuade people.
Well, so on that note, we're coming down to the end of the interview, so just two more questions. And one of them, since we're talking about AI, what do you think a good sentience test is for AI? When is it really going to be a thing that understands itself?
So I'll kind of again come at this from two angles. One, I am not an expert on sentience in AI, so I want to qualify it with that, right? And I think it is a borderline philosophical question as well as a scientific one. AI is the goal rather than sentience in a lot of places is this notion of general intelligence, and the notion of general intelligence is this ability to kind of extrapolate. And I think we're going to spend more time arguing about whether AI has reached that capability than we are going to spend actually acknowledging whether it has or not. I think there are certain thresholds that could get interesting, but there are challenges around compute and energy. There are constraints that literally around natural resources and the amount of compute currently that would be required for something to be able to process this much information and actually you know think and develop new ideas and be integrated with a soft robot that could start to do human-like behavior and then develop this kind of world where we have synthetic human beings. I think that's a while off, and I don't necessarily think it's a guaranteed outcome. Like I know there are a lot of people who view it as a guaranteed outcome. We have a lot of different ways that with, whether you want to take the regulatory route or just kind of the shared human experience route, the way technology evolves could change. You could easily imagine a world where our airplanes probably function and look very different, right? But we have these standards that kind of emerged, and most of our airplanes look like long metal tubes, right? I think we're going to get there through conversation, through ideally a lot of this open sourcing. We're going to reach a point where we're going to, use AI effectively to solve problems and I'm not sure that sentience is something explicitly to worry about. I do know about the alignment problem. I do know about the efforts that are being made to ensure that dumber artificial intelligence systems kind of inform smarter ones to restrict their actions. But I think ultimately, no matter what, it's going to be humans, right? Like, I don't know if people saw kind of this silly blockbuster movie from last year called The Creator, but this notion of if AI ever does anything explicitly harmful, it's almost definitely going to be because of a human, feeding the algorithm something, pushing it to do something. It's highly unlikely that we're going to have a system that by itself, achieves this Terminator-like status. And I also don't think it's a rational thing to be afraid of right now. We need to be aware of kind of the problems that are immediately in front of us, and we need to measure AI in terms of how it uh, can better equip us to get things done. Right? It's out in the world. How can we use it?
Unfortunately, humans create enough of their own problems right now, but with strong people like you in the field, making our recruiting systems better, hopefully we can sort of decrease some of those hurdles and make things a little bit better for everyone. So, Adam, I want to say one more time, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope everybody watching will continue to come to these. We do it every week at the same time on Fridays. You can follow us on our YouTube channel for HR Sci or join our LinkedIn network through HR Science also. And Adam, I do want to give you the last word. What's the one thing that you want to leave people here with the last idea?
Sure. So I really appreciate it, John. Thank you so much for having me. And I think back to an interview I did with Krista Dialamonte, who's the head counsel at Paramount. I was blessed to have the opportunity to interview her, and I asked her like what quote really resonated with her, and it was a really simple thing. She said, "Ride the wave." And she elaborated on it to say like ride the wave, don't fight the tide. And what she meant by that was, you could apply it to AI, you could apply it to kind of how the world is transforming. When you ride the wave, you can still do different moves on your surfboard, right? You can still choose your direction. But when you try to fight the tide of something that's kind of evolving, and kind of has become this inevitability, you're not going to have as much success. You're going to have a lot more success shaping things directionally by riding that wave, right? And I think there's this old mindset in a lot of spaces where companies have refused to evolve their technology stacks, have refused to try to digitize certain experiences. And they're fighting a tide that is going to eventually kind of burst through. And, the best thing I think that people can do is again kind of ride the wave and just keep going and learn how the world is evolving and find ways to adapt and perform in that space.
I love it. Thanks so much, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.